They humiliated him at a busy intersection, under the gaze of strangers, simply for being a black man in a sharp suit who stood too confidently in their city. Sergeant Carlson thought his authority was absolute, unaware that the man he mocked with racist slurs would soon become his superior. That moment would spark a transformation, shaking the department, altering lives, and redefining the meaning of justice. What happened next would shock even the most hardened skeptics, but let's start at the beginning. It was an evening that encapsulated the beauty of fall in the city. The air was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby street vendor. The sky, painted in deep hues of orange and purple, reflected off the tall glass buildings that framed the bustling downtown streets. People moved purposefully along the sidewalks, their coats buttoned against the cool breeze, while cars crawled through the steady hum of city life. Sergeant Rick Carlson and Officer Dale Harris cruised through the main thoroughfare in their marked patrol car. Carlson, a stocky man in his early 40s with a square jaw and a thinning crown of sandy blonde hair, sat confidently behind the wheel. His uniform was immaculate, the badge on his chest gleaming under the dim glow of the streetlights. Beside him, Harris, younger and wiry with a buzz cut, adjusted his hat nervously. It was clear from the stiff way he sat that he was still acclimating to the demands of his role. The patrol car rolled to a stop at a red light, its engine rumbling softly. On the corner, Jamal Brooks waited for the signal to change. Jamal was strikingly composed, his tall frame accentuated by the sharp lines of his tailored gray suit. A dark tie knotted neatly at his throat complemented his attire, and a polished briefcase dangled effortlessly from his hand. His smooth, dark skin glowed faintly under the street lamp, and his posture exuded confidence, a man seemingly in full control of his world. Carlson's eyes narrowed, his face twisting into an expression of disdain as he locked on to Jamal. "Look at him," he muttered, the tone of his voice laced with unwarranted suspicion. "Probably some hustler trying to look legit." He sneered, his words hanging in the air with a venomous undertone. Harris, uncertain but eager to fit in, let out a half-hearted chuckle. His discomfort was evident, but he said nothing, avoiding Carlson's eyes as he glanced out the window. Carlson reached for the power window control, rolling it down with a loud mechanical hum. The cool evening air rushed in, carrying with it the faint sound of distant sirens and street chatter. "Hey, buddy!" Carlson's voice cut sharply through the noise of the street, drawing the attention of a few pedestrians. "You got a permit to stand there looking important?" His words dripped with mockery, and a smug grin curled the corners of his lips. Jamal turned his head slowly toward the car, his expression calm yet resolute. His deep brown eyes met Carlson's piercing blue ones without a hint of submission. "Just waiting for the light, officer," he replied, his voice measured and steady. There was no anger, only an undercurrent of dignity that defied Carlson's provocation. Carlson's smirk deepened, his expression that of a man who believed he had the upper hand. "Sure you are," he jeered, his tone dismissive. "Don't get too comfortable in our city." The traffic light turned green, and with a lurch, the patrol car sped away, leaving behind the hum of its engine and the echo of unwarranted humiliation. Jamal remained rooted in place, his grip tightening briefly on the handle of his briefcase. He straightened his posture, the faintest sigh escaping his lips as he turned back toward the crosswalk. His gaze drifted ahead, calm but introspective. He shook his head slightly, the weight of the interaction settling over him like an unwelcome shadow. The city continued around him, indifferent to the exchange. A group of teenagers laughed as they passed, a street performer played soft jazz on a battered saxophone, and the signal finally blinked green. Jamal stepped into the intersection, his stride confident, though the sting of the encounter lingered. Inside, he steeled himself, not just against this moment, but against the countless others like it, a silent but determined resolve flickering within him. The weeks passed quickly, but for the officers at the precinct, the days were tinged with unease. The announcement of a mandatory sensitivity training session had stirred discontent among the ranks. In the locker room, grumbles and sarcastic remarks filled the air. "Sensitivity training? What a waste of time," Carlson muttered loudly, pulling on his uniform. I've been doing this job for 20 years without needing a lecture on how to be sensitive." His words elicited a few chuckles from like-minded colleagues. Harris, seated nearby, avoided eye contact, his discomfort palpable. Rumors of a significant leadership change added to the tension. Whispers circulated about a new chief superintendent taking over. A progressive reformer, it was said. Carlson dismissed the chatter with a wave of his hand. "Political noise," he sneered over coffee in the break room. "The brass will make a show of it, and then it'll be business as usual. They're not touching me." On the day of the announcement, the precinct buzzed with barely concealed anticipation. Officers shuffled into the briefing room, some curious, others indifferent, and a few openly defiant. The room was packed, the murmur of conversation punctuated by nervous laughter and the occasional clink of coffee mugs. Carlson took his usual spot near the front, lounging in his chair with a casual arrogance. Harris, sitting beside him, fidgeted with his notepad, his nerves betrayed by the restless tapping of his pen. The room fell silent as Captain Rodriguez, a seasoned officer known for his no-nonsense demeanor, stepped to the podium. He cleared his throat, his expression carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our department. Please welcome our new Chief Superintendent, Jamal Brooks." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room as Jamal Brooks strode confidently to the front, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. His tall frame was draped in a pristine uniform, the gold badge of Chief Superintendent gleaming prominently on his chest. His demeanor was composed yet commanding, exuding an aura of quiet authority. His dark eyes swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each officer, lingering just a fraction longer on Carlson. Carlson's face turned an unnatural shade of red as recognition struck him like a freight train. He stiffened in his seat, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. Fear flickered in his usually steely blue eyes, though he masked it with a forced scowl. Harris, meanwhile, sank deeper into his chair, his gaze fixed firmly on the tabletop in front of him. The rookie's face was a picture of guilt and shame, his shoulders hunched as if hoping to disappear entirely. Jamal stepped behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, and surveyed the room. The tension was palpable, the silence deafening. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. His calm tone held an undercurrent of resolve, each word carefully chosen. "I am here to serve and to lead. Together, we will confront the biases that divide us, starting today." His words hung in the air, heavy with purpose. Jamal's gaze returned to Carlson, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The sergeant's earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by the uneasy awareness that the very man he had demeaned weeks ago now held the power to redefine the department. The room remained silent, the officers absorbing the gravity of the moment. Harris risked a quick glance at Jamal, but the new chief's eyes remained locked forward, his composure unwavering. Jamal's presence was undeniable, a living testament to resilience and determination, standing as a stark contrast to the biases that had festered within the department. As the briefing continued, Carlson's mind churned with conflicting emotions. He felt the weight of Jamal's words and the inevitability of the changes to come. Harris, meanwhile, scribbled nervously in his notebook, his thoughts a jumble of regret and apprehension. The room, once filled with murmurs and defiance, now sat under the shadow of a man determined to transform it. The department, Carlson realized with a sinking feeling, would never be the same again. Under Jamal's leadership, changes swept through the department. Officers were subjected to rigorous training on diversity, and misconduct cases were reviewed. Carlson found himself under scrutiny for multiple complaints lodged against him. One day, Jamal summoned Carlson to his office. The room was stark and commanding, much like its occupant. "Sergeant Carlson," Jamal began, his tone measured, "do you remember our interaction at the traffic light?" Carlson hesitated, then nodded, his bravado replaced with unease. "I do," he admitted quietly. Jamal leaned forward. "I am not here for revenge, but to make this department better. You've been given chances to change, but your record suggests otherwise. The choice is yours. Embrace reform or step aside. Carlson left the office with Jamal's words echoing in his ears. For the first time, the veteran officer felt a pang of regret, forced to confront his role in perpetuating the very culture Jamal sought to dismantle. Months later, the department was unrecognizable. Under Jamal's guidance, it became a model of integrity and equity. Carlson, once defiant, chose to retire, unable to adapt to the new expectations. Harris, however, embraced the changes, finding new purpose in his role. At a citywide community meeting, Jamal stood before a diverse crowd. This journey wasn't about punishment, he declared. It was about understanding, growth, and accountability. The audience erupted in applause, their faith in the department restored. Jamal scanned the crowd, catching sight of Carlson in the back. The former officer nodded solemnly, a silent acknowledgement of the new chapter forged under Jamal's leadership, a chapter where justice, not prejudice, prevailed.